Picture yourself standing on the command deck of a titan of industry. You are the CEO of a German manufacturing giant. Maybe you forge the high-grade steel that holds up skyscrapers, or you synthesize the complex chemicals that keep global agriculture alive. You operate in the Federal Republic of Germany, a nation that has spent the last 70 years building a reputation for absolute engineering dominance, efficiency, and industrial might. But step out onto your factory floor today, in late 2023 or 2024, and listen. It's quiet. It is a terrifying, unnatural silence. You haven't shut down these assembly lines because the world stopped buying your products. You aren't closed because your workforce walked out on strike. You have ceased operations because you literally cannot afford to pay the electric bill required to turn the machines on. Welcome to the Energiewende. Sounds fancy, right? Like a new German techno band playing in a Berlin basement. But no, it's actually the sound of money being set on fire. It was supposed to be humanity's glorious transition into a utopia of wind, solar, and guilt-free electricity. Instead, it has become the most expensive, self-inflicted wound in modern economic history. Germany has incinerated over $500 billion, $500 billion, attempting to engineer this green miracle. And what is the return on that mountain of cash? They now suffer the highest electricity prices in the industrialized world, an economy that is actively de-industrializing, and a grid so unstable it requires life support. But if you want to understand the true depth of this absurdity, look at the Garzweiler coal mine. Right now, heavy machinery is literally tearing down operational wind farms to expand a lignite coal mine. You heard that correctly. They are dismantling the symbols of the Green Revolution to dig up the dirtiest fossil fuel on the periodic table. Today, we are going to dissect how a lethal cocktail of arrogance, geopolitical blindness, and panic led a superpower into a trap of its own design. Strap in, because we are about to drive off a cliff. To understand how a nation known for logic committed economic suicide, we have to rewind to 2010. It feels like a different epoch. The iPhone 4 had just dropped, and Germany was the undisputed economic engine of Europe. Back then, Chancellor Angela Merkel was in charge. She holds a PhD in quantum chemistry. She understands how atoms work better than I understand my own dating life. Yet, somehow, she decided to ignore physics entirely. At the time, Germany's grid was the envy of the continent, a robust, stable mix of nuclear, coal, and renewables. Nuclear provided a quarter of the country's power. It was carbon-free, it was reliable, and most importantly, it was cheap. The strategy was rational. Use nuclear as the sturdy bridge while slowly, methodically ramping up renewables over the next few decades. It was a plan built on math. Then, on March 11, 2011, the Earth buckled in Japan. The Tohoku earthquake unleashed a tsunami that devastated the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. It was a tragedy of immense proportions, but we need to look at this with cold, hard objectivity. Fukushima was a 40-year-old plant design, built on a coastline in one of the most seismically active zones on the planet, hit by a once-in-a-century tidal wave. Germany, for the record, is located on the North European plain. It is not exactly known for its massive Pacific tsunamis or catastrophic earthquakes. Logic, the kind of logic a quantum chemist should possess, would dictate a safety review. You check your backup generators, you reinforce your seawalls, and you move on. But politics is not about logic. It is about emotion. And in 2011, the German public was swept up in a wave of hysteria. The German Green Party, which had been fighting a crusade against nuclear energy since the Chernobyl scare of the 80s, saw their opportunity and took it. They didn't care about the geological differences between Honshu and Bavaria. They cared about the narrative. And Merkel? Did she stand firm on the data? Did she calculate the baseload requirements for the world's fourth largest economy? No. She looked at the polls, saw her coalition was in danger, and she folded. Days after the disaster, she announced the Atomausstieg, the nuclear exit. Germany would violently shut down all of its nuclear reactors by 2022. 8 of them were killed instantly. This decision is the original sin of the current crisis. Let me put this in terms that anyone who owns a home can understand. Imagine you live in a house with a reliable, paid-off furnace. It's a bit old. Maybe it looks scary to some people, but it keeps you warm in the dead of winter for pennies. You decide you want to switch to solar panels. That's a noble goal. But instead of installing the panels first, verifying they work, and keeping the furnace as a backup, you take a sledgehammer to your furnace in the middle of a blizzard. Your kids are shivering, your wife is packing her bags, and you're standing there screaming, "Don't worry, I ordered some solar panels from Amazon. They'll be here eventually." It's not just optimism, it's insanity. Germany took 17 paid-off, zero-carbon baseload power plants and threw them in the trash. This isn't just a mistake, it's vandalism. Why is this a $500 billion error? Because when you build wind turbines to replace working nuclear plants, you aren't adding capacity. You are spending billions just to run in place. But destroying your own energy independence was only step one. Now that they had killed their reliable power source, they needed a fix. And they decided to shake hands with a dealer who would eventually hold a knife to their throat. So, the nuclear plants were dead or dying. Germany had committed to a future powered by the breeze and the sun. To fund this dream, the government passed the Renewable Energy Sources Act, or EEG. This was essentially a blank check signed by the German taxpayer. Between 2010 and 2020, homeowners and small businesses were bled dry by surcharges on every kilowatt hour to subsidize wind parks and solar arrays. German electricity prices skyrocketed to nearly 3 times the US average. Pause for a second. Imagine opening your electricity bill and seeing it has more zeros than your phone number. Would you riot? I would. I'd probably be out on the street with a pitchfork. But the Germans, bless them, just paid up. Let me know in the comments. What's the most ridiculous bill you've ever paid? Did you pay it or did you fight it? But here's the punchline that nobody finds funny. Despite pouring hundreds of billions of euros into this transition, Germany's carbon emissions barely budged for an entire decade. Why? Because physics doesn't care about your subsidies. When the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, a phenomenon Germans call Dunkelflaut, or dark doldrums, you still need power. Since they had smashed their nuclear furnaces, they had to revert to the 19th century. They burned lignite coal, the sootiest, nastiest rock in the ground, just to keep the lights on. They killed the cleanest form of baseload power to save the environment, only to end up choking on coal dust. But you can't run a modern digital economy solely on coal and hope. You need a bridge fuel, something that burns cleaner than coal and can spin up fast when the wind dies. Germany chose natural gas, but Germany has almost no gas of its own. Enter the dealer, Vladimir Putin. For decades, the German political elite operated under a delusion called Wandel durch Handel, change through trade. The theory was incredibly seductive. If we buy enough gas from Russia, if we entangle our economies so deeply that they need our euros as much as we need their hydrocarbons, Russia will transform into a nice, liberal partner. We won't go to war with our best customer, right? This wasn't just optimism. It was geopolitical negligence masquerading as diplomacy. It led to the construction of Nord Stream 1 and the planning of Nord Stream 2, massive arteries of steel laid under the Baltic Sea, designed to pump cheap Siberian gas directly into the veins of German industry. It was a drug, and Germany was the junkie. By 2021, the country was importing 55% of its natural gas from Russia. The entire business model of giants like BASF, Bayer, and Volkswagen was predicated on one fatal assumption: that cheap Russian gas would flow forever. There were warnings. Oh, were there warnings? The Poles screamed it. The Ukrainians begged them to stop. The Baltic states warned that Berlin was handing the Kremlin a kill switch for the European economy. And let's not forget the most viral moment of them all. In 2018, at the United Nations, then-President Donald Trump stood up and bluntly stated that Germany would become totally dependent on Russian energy if it did not immediately change course. The cameras cut to the German delegation. They were smirking. They were laughing. You can almost hear the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme song playing in the background. Look at their faces. That is the face of someone who thinks they are the smartest person in the room, about 5 minutes before stepping on a rake. They nudged each other like sophisticated aristocrats mocking the village idiot. Listen to him, their eyes said. He doesn't understand high-level European diplomacy. Fast forward to February 2022. Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, and the laughter in Berlin stopped dead. Suddenly, the change through trade policy looked less like sophistication and more like suicidal stupidity. When the sanctions hit and Russia throttled the gas flows before the pipelines mysteriously blew up, Germany was caught with its pants down in a blizzard. The price of gas didn't just go up, it went vertical. Spot market prices increased by 1,000% at the peak. Remember that factory owner from the beginning? Suddenly, his energy bill went from $1 million a month to $10 million. You can't absorb that. You can't pass that on to a global market that can just buy steel from Ohio or Shanghai. The German government had to scramble in a blind panic. They bailed out utility giant Uniper with a $30 billion lifeline just to prevent a total grid collapse. Then came the ultimate humiliation. Robert Habeck, the economic minister from the Green Party, a man whose entire career was built on fighting fossil fuels, had to go on a desperate world tour, bowing to the Emir of Qatar, begging for LNG, liquefied natural gas, to replace the Russian pipeline gas. The irony is suffocating. LNG is far more expensive than pipeline gas. It has to be cooled to 160 degrees, shipped across oceans on massive tankers, and regasified. It is physically impossible for LNG to ever be as cheap as gas piped from Russia. This means the era of cheap German manufacturing is likely gone forever. The competitive advantage that made in Germany a global powerhouse, high quality at a competitive price, was secretly subsidized by cheap Russian hydrocarbons. Now that the subsidy is gone, the foundation isn't just cracking, it is crumbling into dust. And as the factories go dark, the titans of industry are looking for the exit door. If you want to see the real body count of this energy war, don't look at a utility bill. Look at Ludwigshafen. This is the home of BASF, the largest chemical producer on the planet. To give you a sense of scale, this single industrial site consumes about as much natural gas as the entire country of Switzerland. For decades, this was the beating heart of German industry, taking that cheap Russian gas and transmuting it into the fertilizers, plastics, and vitamins that the modern world relies on. But in 2023, the heart started skipping beats. BASF announced it was permanently downsizing in Europe. They cut 2,600 jobs at their flagship plant. They shut down one of their ammonia plants. And where is that capital fleeing to? China. BASF is currently pouring $10 billion into a state-of-the-art complex in Zhanjiang. Why? Because in China, the energy is cheap, the supply is stable, and the government isn't trying to guilt trip you for running a factory. But if BASF was a warning shot, what happened next was the execution. The original version of this story might have told you that Volkswagen was considering moving production. That is ancient history now. The reality of late 2024 and 2025 is far more brutal. For the first time in its 87-year history, Volkswagen, the very symbol of German pride and engineering, announced plans to close factories right there on German soil. This was a taboo that was never supposed to be broken. Think about the gravity of this. Germany invented the automobile. But today, industrial electricity prices in Germany are nearly 3 times higher than in the US or China, making the production of a car in its homeland an act of financial suicide. While Berlin strangles its own automotive sector with energy costs, China is flooding the market with cheap EVs powered by unrestricted coal and nuclear plants. Germany isn't just losing money here. By forcing its crown jewel to close its doors, the nation is losing its soul. Economists have a polite, sterile term for this: structural change. I have a more accurate term: de-industrialization. Germany is an export economy. It doesn't have a Google, a Facebook, or financial sector like Wall Street. It makes physical things. If you strip away the ability to manufacture competitively, what is left? A really nice museum with excellent beer. The CEO of BASF, Martin Brudermüller, didn't mince words when he said, "Europe is becoming increasingly uncompetitive." That is CEO speak for, we are leaving before the ship sinks. And when these steel mills close, they don't come back. When the chemical plants move to Guangdong, they stay in Guangdong. Germany is hollowing itself out to meet carbon targets that its economic rivals are happily ignoring. It is the equivalent of setting your own house on fire just to show the neighbors how serious you are about fire safety. Now you might ask, but they built all those wind turbines? Can't they just use that power? This is where the incompetence truly shines. Germany has a geography problem that no amount of wishful thinking can solve. The wind blows in the north, where the ocean is. The factories are in the south, in Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, where BMW and Siemens live. To get the power from A to B, you need massive high-voltage transmission superhighways. The biggest project, Südlink, was supposed to be the main artery of this transition. The plan was to have it ready by 2022, just in time for the nuclear shutdown. The reality? It is stuck in bureaucratic hell. Due to endless lawsuits and not-in-my-backyard protests, the government capitulated and agreed to bury the cables underground. This tripled the cost and delayed the project until 2028. Maybe. So, here's the absurdity of the current situation. When a storm hits the North Sea and the turbines spin like crazy, there is too much power in the north and no wire to send it south. The grid gets overloaded. To prevent a blackout, grid operators have to order the wind farms to turn off. But here is the kicker. The wind farms still get paid. It's called redispatch, or as I call it, ghost electricity. German consumers are paying wind farms billions of euros to literally do nothing. Let me explain how stupid this is. It's like paying a pizza delivery guy to not bring you a pizza, and then paying a second guy double to bring you a burnt piece of toast instead. It is a masterpiece of inefficiency. In 2022 alone, the cost of this congestion management hit a record $4.2 billion. Let that sink in. You are burning money to keep turbines idle. Meanwhile, because that clean power can't reach the south, the factories in Bavaria have to fire up, you guessed it, gas and coal plants to keep running. You are paying twice. Once for the green energy you didn't get, and once for the dirty energy you had to use instead. And who foots the bill for this Rube Goldberg machine of madness? It's not the politicians. It's the German grandma checking her mailbox, finding an electricity bill that has doubled in 3 years, and wondering how she's going to afford to heat her home next winter. And speaking of heating, the government was about to make that problem a whole lot worse. By 2023, the government realized that burning coal to replace nuclear power wasn't exactly great for their optics. They needed a new win. They needed to decarbonize your basement. Enter the Heizungsgesetz, the heating law. Economic Minister Robert Habeck pushed through a mandate that effectively banned new oil and gas boilers starting in 2024. The designated replacement? Heat pumps. Now don't get me wrong, heat pumps are miraculous technology. They are essentially air conditioners running in reverse, and they are incredibly efficient. But there is a catch. They work best in modern, well-insulated, hermetically sealed homes with underfloor heating. Do you know what most German houses are? They are drafty, post-war brick fortresses that are terrible at holding heat. To make a heat pump work in a 1950s German home, you often need to rip up the floors, replace the radiators, and insulate the entire shell of the building. The cost? It can easily run between $20,000 and $50,000 per household. The government offered subsidies, but the messaging felt like a forced expropriation. Suddenly, a pensioner living in a paid-off house was told she might have to take out a massive loan just to stay warm. The public reaction wasn't just anger, it was fury. The tabloid Bild ran headlines calling it the Heizhammer, the heat hammer. Habeck's approval ratings fell off a cliff, and the far-right AfD party surged in the polls, largely by promising, "We won't touch your boiler." The panic was so real that heat pump sales actually crashed in 2024 because people rushed out to buy brand new gas boilers before the ban kicked in, locking in fossil fuel usage for another 20 years. It was a masterclass in how to destroy public trust. Now, the German government will look you in the eye and say, "But wait, our emissions are dropping. We hit our climate targets." And technically, they are right. In 2023, Germany's CO2 emissions dropped to their lowest level in 70 years. But why? Was it because of the heat pumps? Was it the wind turbines? No. It was because the factories stopped running. Energy-intensive production fell by nearly 20%. When you shut down steel mills, paper factories, and chemical plants, your emissions go down. Hooray! You saved the planet by destroying your economy. This is the equivalent of losing weight by cutting off your leg. Yes, the scale says you are lighter, but you are bleeding out on the bathroom floor. The head of Germany's own audit office explicitly called this out, stating that Germany is not on track for a sustainable transition, but rather for an economic contraction, masquerading as climate success. And here's the fatal blow that few people are talking about: the AI energy gap. We are entering the most energy-intensive technological era in human history. The age of artificial intelligence doesn't run on wind or hope. It runs on baseload power, massive, consistent electricity, 24/7. While Germany was busy turning off its last 3 nuclear reactors in 2023, look at what the Americans were doing. In September 2024, Microsoft signed a deal to restart the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant. Why? To feed its voracious AI data centers. Amazon and Google are doing the same, pouring billions into nuclear energy. The tech giants understand a law of physics that German politicians ignored. You cannot build a digital future on the back of weather-dependent power. By outlawing the only source of clean, stable energy, Germany hasn't just lost its industrial edge, it has effectively excluded itself from the AI revolution. So, where does that leave us? The Germans have a word for this specific kind of situation: Geisterfahrer. It refers to a ghost driver, someone driving the wrong way down the Autobahn, but who is convinced that all the hundreds of cars coming at him are the ones going the wrong way. Germany wanted to be a role model for the world. They wanted to be the Vorbild. And in a twisted way, they succeeded. At the COP28 climate summit and throughout 2025, over 20 of the world's largest economies, including the US, France, Japan, and even Sweden, pledged to triple their nuclear energy capacity. The world looked at Germany's $500 billion experiment, saw the de-industrialization, saw the coal mines expanding, saw the panicked citizens, and they recoiled in horror. They decided to do the exact opposite of what Berlin did. Germany sacrificed its economy to teach humanity a free lesson in physics and economics. They showed us that you cannot run a G7 nation on ideology alone. Energy policy requires math, it requires engineering, and it requires realism. If you let dogma drive the bus, don't be surprised when it goes off a cliff. Germany paid $500 billion for this lesson. You got it for free by watching this video? That's a pretty good ROI. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. It helps me keep my own lights on without selling my soul to a coal mine. See you next time.